Coming to you from Studio HQ. This is a new episode of Thinking the Extra. And Thinking the Extra today, we've got a special guest. His name is Trevor Fernandes-Lenkiewicz. What's happening, Trevor?
Oh, not much, Shane. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And look, before we do talk about Trevor and his amazing new project, Area 51, I just want to shout out our sponsor. And October 1st is Buying the Comics Day. If you're a creator like my guest today, reach out to your local comic book store, make it an event, celebrate local creators. It's basically Artist Alley in your LCS. So Trevor, growing up in Connecticut, where did you find your love of comics?
So it's weird. I didn't really grow up reading comics.
Hmm.
I didn't find comics, or comics didn't really find me until I was about 17. I would say 16,
Okay,
17.
wow. Hmm.
Yeah. I got them a little bit older. I think I mean, when I was a teenager, I sort of fell victim to like this social misrepresentation of comics as being like juvenile or what have you. And
Kids.
um, you know, I was at a friend's house back in the day, and there was a power outage, so he didn't really have much to do. And he had kind of collected some Batman comics, and I dove right through. I mean, I grew up watching Batman the Animated Series and like the
Hmm.
Batman Beyond and Justice League animated stuff, um, on top of like the Teen Titans sort of anime inspired series. And so I was a little bit primed for it. And eventually, and this was well after the series had come out, but for some reason I gravitated towards Final Crisis,
Okay.
and I got all 7 issues of that. And instead of running away, panicking and scared, I was like, "How did we get here? Like, how did we get to like Batman using a god-killing bullet and Superman singing and Wonder Woman like being controlled by some like gnarly looking face mask?" And
Hmm.
so, between like being captivated by what was going on and like the J.G. Jones art, I was like, oh, this Grant Morrison guy also did Batman for a while leading up to this, and right after. So I was like, okay, that's where I go. And I ran through Grant Morrison's Batman, and eventually that led me into buying the early trades of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman and the New 52. And around that time, I mean that stuff just absolutely took over my life. I
Hmm.
remember going to the store, and the only way for me to get Batman Death of the Family at the time in trade was to buy the hardcover. And I remember that extra
Yeah.
$7 breaking my back. Uh, and at that point, I knew it would be a while until the next trade came out because they were in the middle of actually doing 0 year in the comics. So I ended up becoming a Wednesday Warrior, and buying Batman turned into buying Batman and Detective and Justice League, and that spawned out into Green Lantern and Flash, and then so on and so forth. And here I am, and years later, writing comics, love it, being an absolute admirer of comics, and reading from any publisher who's putting out good work, really.
Yeah, and you've thrown a few names out there: Grant Morrison, Snyder. But who were your major inspiration? Who inspired you to go?
Mm.
I think I could do. I could kind of do this.
It's weird. So I mean, I got my sort of feet wet doing like comics review and discussion media for a little bit while I was in college. I didn't have many friends that did it, so I started doing YouTube and ended up making a couple peers and interviewing some creators that I admired, like Brian Hill and Jason Fabok, Pete Tomasi, Robert Venditti. And they had some very kind things to say at some point during the interviews, after the interviews, just saying that the way that I broke down comics was different, and that I ought to consider
Mhm.
doing it. And I still sort of never really thought much of it. I just took them as compliments. And back in 2019 during New York Comic Con, I went to a press panel for Marvel with CB
Mhm.
Cebulski and Chris Claremont, and I ended up asking a question during the panel that seemed to have gotten Sobolski's attention because we kind of moseyed on into each other. He said, I don't normally get questions like that. I like where your head is at. We had a little bit of a conversation, and he's like, have you ever thought about working in comics? And then, I was just like, of course, like as a fan, we all sort of want to make comics, but
All want to do it.
it seems like a pipe dream. And
Mm-hmm.
so, he asked me if I had ever thought about working in editorial, and I told him I was in college, and he had brought up that they had an editorial internship. So he gave me his business card, which a friend of mine famously got like an action shot of, which is cool. And I applied. I interviewed in March of 2020.
Wow.
And we all know what happens in March of 2020. World goes on lockdown. Yeah, and they couldn't bring any new people into the office, much less an intern. So, it kind of broke my heart. And so that eventually led me to just deciding I wasn't going to ask for permission. And I started working on what is now my first series, Area 51, the Helix Project.
Mm-hmm.
And, here we are. So it's a weird, very, I think, unconventional path to comics. I mean, I was going to school for molecular and cellular biology. So, in even loving and being an adamant reader of comics and doing the review media, never did I actually think that getting to the point where I would be making comics on a professional level would be anywhere close to possible.
Yeah, that is so true. And here you are. Which convention was this at?
That looks like Calgary Comics Expo in Canada.
Oh, okay. Wow. So you went up to the far north.
Yeah,
That is
twice.
so
I
cool.
did Toronto Comic Con as well this year.
Wow. Amazing. And how does it feel that, you're going from being a fan, being on the other side of the table to being on the creative side of the table? How does that actually feel as someone who's starting out in the business?
I mean, it's ironically not all that different because I'm still a fan,
Yeah.
There are a lot of guys that I really admire, and I always make it a point at shows to at least try to approach a couple of them. Just to,
Hmm.
just to give thanks and appreciation for the work and the way that it's inspired me in some way.
Yeah.
But it is really cool. I mean, you get to meet people who connect with something that, at some point in time was just floating in the endless pool that is your imagination. And
Hmm.
especially, my favorite part is when somebody is skeptical at the beginning of a convention, might pick up a couple copies or one copy, and they'll come back the next day, buy the rest, and go like, I need more. And they'll tell me why they liked it and enjoyed it. And
Hmm.
I think that is one of the best parts about being a creator, is just knowing that you made something that means something to you, right? Because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, I think the best stories have to be expressing something deeply personal, to know
Hmm.
that it's connecting with other people. It's eye-opening and it's motivating. And like I
Yeah.
said, that's what's changed, and I can
Hmm.
still savor in the idea that somebody is creating something that connects with me, but it's
Hmm.
almost like I'm hitting the other side of the coin, where now I get to make something that's connecting with people. And it's incredible.
Yeah, it's in a way, the way I look at it is sharing. Like, you have your visions, someone else has their vision. It's great when you can actually put it on paper and let
Mhm,
others see what you're actually making. It's absolute gold. Um,
mhm.
I just wanted to ask you a question because in your bio you mentioned that you're a former host of Dark Knight Nation YouTube channel.
Mm.
Tell us, what is Dark Knight Nation?
So that was the review media that I did. I had a YouTube
Hmm.
channel for a little bit where I was, in terms of uploading content, terribly inconsistent, because I was going to school and working full time. But
Hmm.
it started off as just doing reviews, and those reviews sort of, as I found my voice as a reviewer, turned into a little bit more analytical, sort of breakdowns.
Hmm.
And we also would do like these live discussions that sometimes were like relevant to the news in comics, other times were a little bit more avant-garde. I mean, we had conversations about like measuring the morality of American gods through the lens of like superheroes, in our modern mythology. We had conversations about why the world needs Superman now more than ever.
Yeah.
um one of my favorites, it was when I was getting into the beginning. I think I'd maybe written 2 issues in my series. I was like, one of those topics was readers expect both too much and not enough from comic book writers, and we sort of, so
Yeah.
we had a couple cool things like that. I interviewed a lot of really, really talented guys like Brian Hill and Robert Venditti, Jonathan Glapian, Jason Fabek, which were absolute pleasures. And they also, they are honestly a big part of why I'm in the position that I am today and making comics. If it wasn't for them, and I feel like secretly the interviews were like a closeted writer trying to figure out how it all works.
Just trying to steal some ideas. Why not? If they're providing it to you, why not? And that's the thing. It's about networking, right? Because in a way, we need to network. Because if you're going to be your own writer and sit in a corner and do everything without any, trying not to obtain any influences, you find your work is going to be kind of stale. Is that how you'd feel?
Yeah, I
In this
mean, I know
situation?
there's a certain school of creators who are like, when I'm working on something, I don't want to be reading anything else because I'm afraid of
Mhm.
taking too much from someone else. And I think to
Yeah.
myself, like, in all reality, you don't have a single original thought in your head. None of us do. It's
No,
it's
true.
our it's our interpretation of what's around us. And I think, like, if you're threatened about the potential of taking too much, then that means that you don't have enough restraint. I think it's important. Like, and but one of my favorite things to do is actually right before I write is reading
Hmm.
for like a half hour, just to
Yeah.
get the creative juices flowing, just to get my brain thinking and processing things that
Hmm.
way. And I feel confident enough to know that I have the ability to reflect on what I've read and to know not to pull too much, because I don't necessarily think I'm getting inspired by the subject matter. I'm getting inspired by witnessing the craft, so I'm pulling tools as
Yeah.
opposed to, subject matters or specific um, tricks of the trade that are, inherent to a plot or what have you.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's no different than sport, right? If you're a professional athlete, you might go and watch your competitor and see what they do to see how their juices move. You know what I mean? Like, if you're
Mhm.
just going to go, oh, I'm not going to watch any film of this player, but people do it just to get better and like maybe learn some tricks. It's not copy. It's not copying. It's basically just, as you said, just building your craft. It's amazing. All right, talk about amazing. Where did the idea of Area 51 come from? The Helix Project.
Well, the first piece of advice I got when I reached out to a couple of the guys that I had interviewed when I was thinking
Hmm.
about transitioning into being a creator was write what you know. And
Yep.
I spent far too much money at the University of Connecticut learning about molecular and cellular biology. So
Hmm.
I knew that I could bring that element of authenticity to science fiction, which I thought was cool, because sometimes science fiction can come off as fantasy with blinking lights and metal, and this
Hmm.
isn't like discouraging or digging on fantasy, because I like fantasy just as much as I like
Of
sci-fi,
course.
but they're different. They're two very different things. And I
Hmm.
also, I had to think about what I wanted to say with this story, and it's not like this, heavy-handed, I'm smashing you over the head with a message, but there are very relatable human themes that I'm trying to get across. And when I realized that in that stage of my life, balancing the part of me who thought he was gonna, continue on with academia and become, a, 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 a PhD candidate and eventually get a job,
Hmm.
researching in my own lab, and the guy who is now finding this new passion for creating and developing story and worlds and narrative, that was difficult, and it sort of became this abrasive conflict for me and my identity as a person. And I know that, as a broad stroke, people deal with reconciling parts of themselves um, on so many different levels in so many different ways. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. And so I was like, well, DNA is our literal, physical identity. And we're playing with this very human, very wide spanning theme. How can I integrate those two things, right? Like, how can I make the tools of the genre enhance the more personal and the more human elements of the story? And so that's sort of where we go from there.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think it's great that you've been able to find something to put into the story, being your your academic background. Um, but just tell us about how you met the creative team. So your artist, your letterer. You want to shout out your co-creators or
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. They 100% deserve it. So really, you know, the one of the things that I was sort of credited with as a reviewer was being analytical and being able to break down the comic and the craft for its constituent pieces
Absolutely.
and analyzing those things. One of the things I prided myself on as a reviewer at the time and as a comic book conversationalist, if you will, was that I took the time to try to learn and understand the technical language of comics. Um, and so, it took me a long time. So the A covers for issues 1 through 4 and the interiors were done by a veteran Brazilian comic book artist, Marcelo Salaza. Um,
Hmm.
and the colors for all 6 issues and most of the covers were done by Marcio Freire. He also did the secret variant cover to issue 5 in its entirety that's been
Hmm.
released as a stretch goal for this current Kickstarter. And
Hmm.
then joining us for the interiors and A covers for issue 5 and 6, who has also done the secret variant cover for issue 4, is Samuel Iwunze out of Lagos, Nigeria. Incredibly talented guy. Um, and an absolute joy to work with. And then to round it all off, we have, I mean, someone who's considered one of the gold standards for lettering in the industry, a veteran, somebody who's been in the weeds in this game for a good while, and it's Taylor Esposito. I knew that I needed my letterer to be the guy with the most experience, because I think that lettering often gets overlooked, particularly in indie comics,
Absolutely.
and it's the most unsung hero of the medium, because they're essentially your composer. They
Hmm.
are your sound crew. They're doing all the things to keep the flow of the story going without anybody actually knowing or noticing what they're doing so much. So yeah, big shout out to these guys. They're incredible. I've learned so much by working with them, and overall has taught me to be an infinitely better collaborator, writer, storyteller than what I was when I set out to do this.
Hmm. Yes. And how did you meet these people? Where did you go?
Man, well, so it was the middle of the sort of hysteria of the pandemic when
Hmm.
I started putting this together. I mean, we didn't know when all of this was going to end. It was, I would say this summer into the fall of 2020. And so it was just a lot of scrutinizing online, looking at a lot of portfolios. A big part of it was also seeing if people can follow basic prompts, because some guys
Yeah,
might have
that's
impressive
important.
work,
Hmm.
but they either are not very good at interpreting script or sort of the blueprint. Um, or I mean, you run into a lot of folks from overseas that don't really quite speak English very well, so it's difficult for them to understand what you're trying to get across. But I mean, there are
Yeah.
numerous things, right? I mean, there's just the simple notion of being able to follow a prompt and
Hmm.
understand a prompt and deliver on that. So I put through, I wouldn't say a rigorous test, but I would ask for roughs based on some samples, and if they were for example, a colorist, I wanted to see the work before it was colored and after it was colored, so that I could get an
Hmm.
idea if they're actually bringing the overall quality of the work down with their colors. A lot of people just look at that end result, and it's hard to really judge the quality of the colorist if you can't see what the art looked like before they colored the work.
Yeah, true. So true.
So that was definitely an element. I mean, when it came to the letterer or Taylor, I mean, like I said, I knew I wanted an industry vet. I knew it was one of the first things that professional editors will look at, because again, it's mistakenly one of the things that a lot of indie guys will put the least amount of effort in, or the writer will just sort of up and
Yeah.
go, oh well, I can do it, and it ends up being a bit of a disaster. And so, I
Yeah.
wanted to bring somebody on who clearly knew what they were doing, whose work that I admired, and that I felt like I might be able to learn something from. I think that's really important in the sort of collaborative nature of comics, and being able
Hmm.
to interact with the people you work with and learn something from them, because even
Mm-hmm.
if you're not doing their exact task, it makes you a better captain of the ship. It's going to make you a better writer for your collaborators. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just a lot of online scrutinizing. I mean, particularly when it comes to the colorist, I went through, I think, somewhere between 35 and 40 applications
Woo!
until we
Wow.
got it right. So, and thankfully, we found Marcio, and he's been, such an incredible constant throughout this entire process, and improving his work along the way and inspiring me to get better. So,
Damn, that's amazing. And how far down the card did you find Marcio? Was he the 10th or the 15th person?
he was sort of suggested early on, actually, by Marcelo, who penciled and inked the first four
That's
issues.
good. Yeah.
But I just, knowing that I was so fresh and new to this, I wanted to keep looking around, and eventually we sort of got to talking, and we were able to work something out where it seemed like the collaborative relationship could be manageable despite the distance, because pretty much everyone in my art team except for Taylor Esposito is on a different continent than me.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, things just seemed to work out. And when I saw the early stages of Marcio's colors on the book, but between that and some of his prior work, I was like, this guy's incredible. And all I can think about is how we can use the collaboration to make each other better and to grow
Mhm.
from it. And I certainly, I'm not casting any weird shadows over anyone. I certainly had the most growing to do, because these guys were already incredible talents who knew what they were doing, and so
Mhm.
I wanted to make sure that they were people that would inspire me to want to be the writer that they deserved,
Yeah.
in the process.
Mhm. And what were some of the challenges that you faced with getting all this to work? I know you mentioned before about the language barrier, but what were some of the other challenges that you had in putting this together?
Well, I mean, nobody goes into comics because they expect to make bags of cash. Um,
Mhm. Of
so as the
course.
writer, and happily so, I had to make sure that my collaborators were paid a fair wage and that they were taken care of, and compensated for their work and their time and their effort. So,
Mhm.
that's definitely not the easiest thing, considering, I mean, when I started this, I was still finishing up at university, and working to try to stay debt free, from my college education. So, the part of the thing was that in order to make it work, we had to go to crowdfunding, and that bears with it a lot of sort of struggle and frustration in trying to get what you need to make sure everyone's well paid and taken care of. Because, to this day, I mean, we're 5 in, I still haven't paid myself. The money, whenever I get the money, it goes straight to the team. I want to make sure that we're bringing
Yeah.
the best people on to put out the best creative product we possibly can. So, so that's certainly, I would say, a persistent struggle is just trying to make sure the money is flowing in the right direction. And
Yeah.
also, there's so much out there that sometimes it's an uphill battle just to get somebody to take a look at your work.
Mm. No, indeed, that is so true. And yeah, I'm just looking at some of the pages right now. How much articulation did you put into the actual layout of the page? Did you sketch something out and show it to the artist, or is it just everything on bullet points? Or how did you put all this together
Well,
when it
I
comes to
so
the
I
art?
write I write full script method. So
Mhm.
I tend to include a decent amount of detail. Sometimes
Yeah.
if I have a very specific idea, and if it's not clicking from the script, I will, get my hands dirty and do some roughs.
Hmm.
However, I'm not strict about it. For me, the
Yeah.
idea of writing a full script is just to get everything out and onto the page so that the team can best understand what we want to try to go for in the moment, in the scene,
Hmm.
in the greater context of the story, right? Um, so I always include a note at the top of every script, because I write specific
Hmm.
little notes to everybody on the team at the top of the script. And
Okay.
the one persisting thing is, this is just a blueprint. If you see what we're going for and you have an idea that you think could enhance what we're attempting to do, and let's talk about it, right? Like let's work through that in the rough sketch stage, and see what works out best. And there have been moments where my collaborators have, you know, done something completely different or made modifications to a camera angle or a shot size or an expression or a page layout that I had in the script, and they've blown it out of the water and did something that I couldn't have even imagined. And there have been a couple moments in time where I've had to put my foot down and go, hey, I think that this is going to work. I think the work will suffer if we change it. And it's sort of just allowing myself to not, one, overindulge my ego as this sort of pretentious writer, and two, allowing the relationship to be osmotic, allowing everybody to contribute. And so, I don't write a full script necessarily because I want it to be exact, all five senses, exactly what I'm trying to get there. It's really like, here's a feeling I'm trying to generate. And so, I want my collaborators to feel like they have a say in how to best accomplish that through, their particular set of skills.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. I was going to ask you about, if anyone's drawn or illustrated anything that you didn't expect, and then we're okay, we'll stick with that. So you answered that question already. But I just need to know, how much of the script did you write before it went onto pen and paper? Talking about from the artist standpoint.
Well, I mean, usually pretty much, I mean, before the artist gets a script, the script is done. Or at least most of it is done. And I might go back and revise some dialogue or something like that. But really the large pieces are done. I mean, I finished the last issue in the series probably 3 or 4 months ago, script wise. So I'm on to other projects in terms of, my job as a writer. Now as an editor, I'm constantly going in and we're constantly, going over art with the team and trying to find ways to best translate the script or improve upon it or make, additions. So yeah, I mean, I would say at most given times, I was probably at least an issue ahead or close to. I mean, the margins were tighter when we first started. And then as we sort of went further due to sometimes constraints, due to, some, timing difficulties with some of the team, sometimes that gave me the opportunity to give myself a cushion and get pretty far ahead. So I think at best, I think I've been close to 3 issues ahead. At worst,
Wow.
at the beginning, I was really only at times, on to the next issue while they were working on issue one.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because the last thing you need is to be behind on a writer's perspective, because
Yeah.
art can take its time. And I mean, how did you find with the flow of the art? Was it coming through consistently? Um, were there challenges
Um,
with delays?
I mean, there's always a little bit of something, I think part of
Mhm.
it, especially in the beginning, was that, yeah, I mean, I've never done it. I had never done it before. So I had to allow
Mm,
myself, the room to make changes and to try to understand my collaborators and what they do and how they do what they do. Um, so yeah, I mean, there were certain times where we had a little bit of a back and forth, and obviously at times, our personal lives can sometimes, muddy things up, whether it's
no,
like health
that's
or
true.
family or, the pandemic that was looming, over everyone's lives. So, certainly, yeah, there were some challenges in that way, but, we're here now and we were able to work through them all. And I think,
Yeah.
uh, those difficulties, that uphill battle has put us in a position where I think most of us, are putting out the best work of our career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, to find out that this is your first actual project, I'm actually astonished. Just the quality and just everything, really, from the opening pages onwards. It's just mind blowing that this is a first time creator collaborator. It's very impressive. So you should be very proud of yourself, Trevor. But please tell us about your project. Tell us about what people can find on Kickstarter and why they should check it out.
Sure. Well, thank you for the kind words. I really, really appreciate that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
s- so Area 51, the Helix Project, is, a sci-fi noir thriller primarily taking place in the UFO hysteric 1970s under the shadow of the Cold War. And it reimagines that the alien specimen that was mass sighted in Roswell, New Mexico in the late 40s has masqueraded as human for a few decades until he eventually exposes his alien physiology in a last-ditch attempt to save a young girl's life. But in doing so, the result is him being murdered in front of his son, Kent, who's a half-human, half-extraterrestrial hybrid, and he's our point of view character of this story, our protagonist. And so the boy Kent spends the next 13 years as he comes of age struggling to pick up the pieces of his life and trying to find his place in a world that is sort of loudly telling him that it doesn't want him, until he's confronted by a mysterious letter from somebody not only claiming that its sender was there the day that his father was murdered, but that they somehow have a means of getting him back. So he's driven to uncover the circumstances surrounding his father's death, questioning the cryptic motivations of whoever's trying to get a hold of him, and struggling to reconcile that dueling sense of identity. And meanwhile, being dropped into the jaw of this Cold War genetics conspiracy, and is really forced to face a twisted ghost from his past that plunges a dagger into everything he knows about himself, and ultimately what it means to be human. So, it really draws upon my background education wise. I think it draws
Mm-hmm.
upon, something that as a human being, that I try to work out for myself, and that I'm sort of using this as an outlet to do that. And so I try to make a story that is entertaining and uses the tools of the genre in order to, I think, convey something very real and something personal and something that people can relate to.
You did name drop a few people that would be in line with your work, and they're the names like Alan Moore, Dwayne McDuffie, and Ed Brubaker. Were these inspirations to you? Were these creators you looked up to?
I
And
mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Alan Moore is, I mean, if you're a comic book writer, I feel like whether you're atheist, agnostic, you name it, he's still
Mhm.
got to be the god you pray to every night in order to accomplish your script. I mean, he's incredible, and his
Yeah,
work
he
is
is.
is is subversive and incredibly deliberate and tasteful. He's his type of work is what I strive to do, and where
Mhm.
I don't know if I'll ever get to the point where I can put out something at the level of uh, Alan Moore. It's a platform to reach for, and to be inspired by. I mean, what he does is incredible. He changed everything we know about comics,
Yeah.
and so it's hard not to be inspired by someone like that. And
Mhm.
Brubaker and Phillips and Sean Phillips specifically are, I mean, they're changing. They've been the catalyst for a massive change in indie comics, but I've also just been such big fans of the ways that they're able to use sort of, the visual storytelling of comics, and that collaborative effort between both Brubaker and Phillips in order to build tension and drama through their stories. It's never overwritten, and it focuses on the fact that it is, that they're working in comics, and that you can take advantage of the sequential
Absolutely.
narrative as a way to propel the story forward. And they're just tricks that I tried to reinvent for myself that I found in their work. This page in particular is actually a really, really good example that you have up here, because it's very much me trying to find a way to reinterpret some of the tools and tricks of Brubaker and Phillips to add to the sort of tension, right, of the scene, and the
Yeah.
deliberation of what we were trying to do. Um, yeah, and when it comes to McDuffie, I grew up watching the Justice League animated stuff. It was far
Mhm.
smarter than it had any right to be. Aside from
Yeah,
the,
true.
the brilliant stuff that he did with Milestone, and I think ultimately, he's obviously thought of as this sort of leader for sort of themes, civil themes in comics, civil rights themes in comics, and for me, it's not as much specifically about the subject matter of civil rights, although you could probably find little thematic hints here and there in the story. It was about finding themes that are real and that matter, and that begin to open up a sort of dialogue about something that's going on in the world, and that continues to go on in the world. Whether it's, obviously some people have the sort of political bend, some folks, it's strictly emotional. And for me, it was trying to find that emotional core of this story that, despite you perhaps living, several hours away via plane, or even,
Mm-hmm.
shout out to Johnny Hughes, also living quite far away from me. You guys
Mm-hmm.
could connect with this story despite having totally different backgrounds, being from an
Exactly.
entirely different reach of globe. So yeah, that was, Dwayne McDuffie in that way was a really big inspiration.
Mm. And one thing I love about some of your page work is the fact that you have letterless page. And I think that's great because, again, the visual storytelling that has a lot of the Brubaker Phillips elements in there. And I just want to talk to you about the digital copies because you did mention that Johnny Hughes and I live fairly far
Mhm.
away. I think Johnny's about 5 hour time difference, where I'm about 16 hour time difference. And to be able to pick up a digital copy at 5 US, I think is amazing. And where did the idea come up to give it such a reasonable price?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I've always been big on just valuing my readers. Comics, unfortunately, being a niche entertainment media, are not the most competitive for your entertainment dollar, and oftentimes the people that lose out the most are the people that love comics. So for
Hmm.
me, just having been a reader and a fan and an admirer of comics, I wanted to get my books into the hands of the people that wanted to read it. Simple enough.
Hmm.
Um, and so actually, up until this point, we were charging $4 for a digital comic.
Oh, wow.
The only reason we increased for two reasons. One, because issue 5 actually has an extra 4 pages of story,
Hmm.
compared to the priors, which had 24 pages. We now have 28. And also, I mean, that truthfully, there was a part of me that was hoping, hey, somebody would acknowledge that we're just trying to deliver value, and maybe they would tell enough people, and they would tell more people, and there would be an admiration for the creative work and for the sort of ethics by which we put the projects out. But to be frank, it hasn't quite built the traction that we were hoping for, and so part of that sort of went into the element of raising the price a little bit. But even then, we literally raised the price by the absolute bare minimum, because I still want to get it out there, and I still want to get it to people at a price that they feel is potentially even, worth more than what they're actually paying for it.
Yeah, and one of my gripes, especially on Think Indie podcast, is the fact that you're seeing like some creators have no digital copies, and
Mhm.
secondly, they charge like exorbitant amounts, maybe like $10, $12 for a digital copy. So I'm really pleased to see that we're seeing a digital copy at this price, because one thing for creators as well, and that I always bring up, is the fact that this is 100% profit to the creator. There's a
Mhm.
100% profit to you. It doesn't cost you any money to click and send an email or send a PDF out
Right.
to anyone. So I think that's a great investment. And the more people to do it, the merrier, because as you said, more hands will get onto the book. And you did mention that this is a volume 5,
Mhm.
and it's a 6 part arc. Until what point will we see number 6? Just asking
I
for a
mean,
friend.
I mean, if this fifth Kickstarter gets funded, I plan on launching the Kickstarter at issue 6 somewhere between October and November. So,
Nice.
we've only been doing this for about a year and a half now. And so for
Yeah,
me,
crazy.
I've always wanted to do my best to keep up with a solid schedule, because it is really hard when you're like crowdfunding and you're sort of boots to the ground indie, trying to make sure that you have the cash flow and the time to make sure that things are moving in a decent schedule. And I know for me, one of the things that I cherish most about the comics and about experiencing media in general is the digestibility and the reading experience. So I wanted to make sure that people were
Mhm.
getting the books as fast as I could get them without diminishing the quality of the books. So I mean, I think also as a, now that I've gotten a little bit more into the weeds of making comics, I'm like a crow. I have other ideas, and it's like my next shiny penny. And
Yeah.
so, I want to tell the story, and I want to give it the ending that it deserves, and I want to go out there and play around in a couple different sandboxes.
Nice. Yeah, it's always good to, explore different realms, like, or even different genres. Um, But I just wanted to share this with everyone and also talk about this. How did you get David Pepose to give you a little shout out in the front of your book? I think that's amazing.
Well, it is amazing, and David was incredibly kind. I mean, David has graciously supported the Helix Project from issue one, from the beginning. And
Mm-hmm.
ironically, I didn't know much of him until he brought the OZ to Kickstarter, which is phenomenal, by the way. Highly recommend
Mm-hmm.
you guys check it out. Um, and that was actually the first work of his that I read from start to finish, or to
Oh
what he
wow.
has up to right now. So that first oversized issue, and I obviously contributed to the second Kickstarter as well, which I know he's working tirelessly on trying to fulfill at the moment. But I thought that was great, and then I went back to all the stuff that he was known for, like Spencer and Locke, and now
Yeah,
obviously
that's
he's
a
on
lot.
Savage Avengers, and fortunately,
Mm-hmm.
I've had the pleasure of getting a chat with him at a couple shows since I started doing Comic Cons last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'd definitely like to call him a pal.
Nice.
And I admire him enough where I was like, hey, if you have the time to give the story a read, I don't want you to feel any pressure if you don't like the material. I was like, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you at all to feel like you need to give me any word of mouth, because I want it to be authentic. I want it to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly don't want to make you feel uncomfortable doing something you don't want to do. I was like, I'm not going to be offended. In fact, if you find problems in the work, I'd actually rather you tell me, because I never want to get too comfortable. I always want to be growing as a storyteller, and as a
Mm-hmm.
collaborator. And fortunately, David read the books, and just it was very, very kind, and it
Yeah.
meant the world, man. It was so impactful to me. I remember exactly when and where I was when I got the email back with his pull quote, and it really, I think it's something that's going to stick with me for a really long time. So big shout out to David Pepose. Anybody
Mm-hmm.
listening should go check out his Savage Avengers, coming out through Marvel right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting him a few years back when I was in Oregon. I was at Rose City Comic Con, and he was such a humble guy. And at the time, well, Spencer Locke was his everything. And to see where he was then and where he is now is a major honor, because this is sort of the avenue that a lot of indie creators want to be, and they want to be in the big two, just because we're fans of the genre. Like, you can't be mad at yourself for wanting to write Batman, right? Because that's
Right.
the book that you mentioned to me from the very beginning, where you wanted to that you got your starting point, and to end it with Batman would be an absolute honor for you, and I'd be really happy for you if that you were given the chance.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, but I'm with you. Massive shout out to David Pepose, because it's where indie creators want to go, and I'm really pleased to see his name being in there. In the previews magazine. Oh my gosh, I'd die if my name was in there. I'm sure
Yeah.
you would too.
Yeah, and no, nobody deserves it more than David. Super talented, obviously incredibly kind, just a lover of the medium, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that in some small way he embraced my work, and
Hmm.
possibly me as a person, and obviously it means all the more because I do admire him as a storyteller. I certainly would not have reached out if I didn't think that. If I didn't think that what he was doing was admirable, and so
Hmm.
I look up to his work and what he's been able to do and how personal he's able to make his stories. And so, like I said, just to get that small seal of approval is incredible,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
yeah, and inspiring and motivating for sure.
And deserving, I've got to say.
Oh, thank you.
And moving on to DG Chichester, man, that name I've not seen for a long, long time. How did you meet Mr. Chichester?
So way back when I was preparing for my interview at Marvel, um,
Hmm.
I was
Oh.
doing a lot of research and reading a
Hmm.
lot of back catalog. And one of the things I was doing is rereading pretty much everything Daredevil from the Stanley Bill Everett stuff, all the way
Hmm.
up to at the
Really?
time and still Zdarsky. And
Hmm.
I remember reading this actually. I took this particular image and highlighted this image because um, the Fall of the Kingpin that he did right after the Nascenti run with the incredibly talented Lee Weeks, I thought was
Mhm.
really great, like really, really incredible. And I think I had just, when I was doing my research, I think I had just like shouted him out, a couple times, and we had like a couple random sort of public Twitter chats. And then eventually, when I took to writing my own comics and I went to my first Comic-Con last year as a creator, I was just fortunately I was able to connect with him and chat, and he was just very kind, just gave me some really great advice, and we sort of stayed connected. And Dan has been kind enough to support the Kickstarters to the Helix Project, and
Mhm.
eventually I was like, hey, I left open the same sort of ask that I did for Dave, and I was like, if you think the work is good, if you think it's worth it, and I'm not going to be offended if you don't, I'd love to get a little uh, um, blurb. And Dan was actually so incredibly gracious that he wrote pretty much an entire introduction. So I ended up including that on the interior to the second printing of our first issue, which it extends beyond this little snippet that I put on the Kickstarter. But
Yeah, wow.
um, that and you know what was crazy? What was just absolutely incredible was that I got both uh, Dave and Dan's pull quotes on the same day. I was in a hotel getting ready to go to Toronto Comic Con to go attend
Mhm.
my table, and I remember, I think I was like, I was so glassy eyed. I was incredibly overwhelmed, and
Talking like this?
yeah, yeah, and just honored, man. To have two guys whose work that I admire, and as people, I can't act like I know them intimately well, but the times
Mhm.
that I have gotten to chat with them in person have been incredibly pleasurable, and I think they've taught me a lot about how to carry myself um, as a creator, and as somebody who maybe somebody will admire my work one day. And I think
Mhm.
about how motivating it was to interact with these guys, and how I want to be that same force for someone else, or even just show my appreciation for the people that give my work the time of day. So it's to know that I have a little bit of approval from storytellers that I look up to. It means the world.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing. I'm so pleased for you, seriously. Hopefully, I'll see your name one day on one of the billboards at one of the previews magazine or something.
I
No,
mean, I wouldn't say no.
absolutely not. You'd be crazy too. Um, but in terms of where you are now, are you is this are you happy with where you are now from when you initially started in the business?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the greatest sources of pride is that I feel like with every issue I've written, I've really leveled up quite a bit. And I think actually, I mean, and while I've been proud of the consistent progress throughout the way, I think between issues 4 and 5 of the Helix Project, I feel like I took a very big leap into
Mhm.
understanding my voice as a storyteller and honing that a little bit, and just being a better collaborator for my team, a little bit more well-rounded. So
Yeah,
I'm happy with the improvement, but I'm never satisfied. I
mm,
never want to get too comfortable. So I'm always looking for
of
ways
course.
to, break down what I've done, and for new routes to improve. So
Mhm.
I'm proud of where I am, because I feel like I've come a long way in the last year and a half, and I feel like um I feel like I can, in terms of on a quality level, I think I can compete with a lot of what's out there. Um,
Mhm.
but I also know that if I want to reach for that rung on the ladder that is Alan Moore, it's a very, very long journey, and there's a lot of steps that I need to take to get to that point. And at the end of the day, for me, that aspiration of being great, being a great storyteller, isn't isn't for the notoriety. It isn't for the title. I think it just means that I've become I've become good at telling stories that matter, and I've become good at telling
Mhm.
stories that connect and relate to people. And so, if I can say that I am truly good at that, truly good at connecting with people through story, I think that is a monumental victory for me in my personal life, even. So, yeah, yes. Sorry, that was a long-winded way of answering your
No, no,
question.
please. You're the guest, so the floor's all yours. What would be your biggest piece of advice that you'd be giving to someone who's watching you for the first time, looking to create their project, their future project? What would be the best piece of advice you could give?
Read and read well. And
Mm-hmm.
by that I mean when you're reading the guys you admire or even the work that you don't like, think about it. Stop for a second because I think it's all too easy to say, "Ah, I want to read the works of Garth Ennis," and you go through his entire catalog, and you might learn something by osmosis. But I think it's really important to take a step back and think about what's working for you, what's not working for you, and why that is. And I think that it'll give you sort of tools to begin to open up your own creative shed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you might begin with the little sort of plastic hammer that squeaks, but the more you observe the people who are doing what you want to do and doing it well, or even innovating on that stage,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to translate that into something that is yours, right? Because you don't want to copy somebody, you don't want to be a cheaper version of someone else. I think that's incredibly unsatisfying, creatively speaking. But trying to make that yours, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really really important to read and to just consider what you're reading and why you like it, why you don't like it, what's being done in the storytelling, right? Is this subplot, not feeling adequately satisfying because they didn't develop this part of the character's arc, or maybe they got a little bit too ham-fisted with it and they tried to hit you over the head with it.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that's just super important. I think the general advice of reading is obviously, it's instrumental, but I think it's how you read. Read
Mm-hmm.
closely,
Never lies.
and if you're a writer, it is 100% just as, if not more important, to pay attention to what the art is doing, because you're not writing for your words to be translated exactly onto the page. You're writing for your words to be translated, for the most part, into a visual sequential narrative. So you need to be paying attention to how information is being transmitted and communicated visually, and that's super super important. So yeah, I think in terms of, for a writer in particular, that would be my biggest piece of advice. When you read,
Fantastic.
read tight, read closely, and pay attention to every part of the process, because it's going to make you better in the long run.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. Best piece of advice. Thank you so much. And Trevor, what music are you listening to when you're in the creative process?
Oh, it depends on what I'm writing. Helix Project. I actually, despite not loving the film, I listened to the Batman vs Superman score
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit. Like I said, even though the film wasn't exactly up my alley, um,
Mm-hmm.
I listened to the score to Inception. I want to
Mm-hmm.
say that was Hans Zimmer. Um, I listened to the score to Taxi Driver quite a bit.
Ooh.
Um, um, and Nas. I listened to a lot of Nas
Really
when
nice.
writing the
Wow.
Helix project. So yeah, and with some of these other projects, I'm listening to a little bit wider of a variety, but I'm not quite sure I want to say, because I'm afraid they might be a little bit too indicative of what I'm doing next.
Okay, yeah, you don't want to give too much away. And but what are you watching at the moment? Are you streaming anything on Netflix or any of the other streaming platforms?
So on my way home from Fan Expo Dallas and Heroes Con in Charlotte, I finished Kenobi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've Kenobi was like an Obi-Wan thing, is the only project I've been asking for from Star Wars since I was a kid. Um, so that was a long time coming. I have been watching Raised by Wolves, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been hit with the unfortunate news that there will not be another season, which certainly breaks my heart, because I started the show with the intent of watching season 3 when it comes out. But
Mm-hmm.
that's like really fun, very eclectic, very like into the weeds genre sci-fi, which I thought was awesome. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's inspiring to see people take such big creative swings, and I think as a creator, that's something that I become more and more into. I don't want anything safe. I think safe stories are typically just less good versions of something that somebody else did when they were pioneering those ideas.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, it's crazy, man. Just with everything going on, I haven't had a lot of time to watch a lot of like visual media. I have been trying to keep up with The Boys. I think I'm like 3
Hmm.
episodes behind. Um, but yeah, I did actually, outside of TV, I actually just saw Everything Everywhere All at Once while I was in
Hmm.
Dallas. And I think
Yeah.
that might have been like one of the most important pieces of art that I've consumed as an adult, if I'm to be completely honest with you.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's a little bit of a taste of what I've been digging into.
Fantastic. And what part of you, Trevor Fernandez Lenkiewicz, can we find in your work? When we read Area 51, what part of you do we find in each and every book?
Well, I think there are parts of me in pretty much the entire cast to some degree. When
Hmm.
it came to deciding to tell the story and deciding how I wanted to tell the story, I wanted a pretty tight main cast. Um, because I just wanted to make sure they all felt individual. And
Hmm.
despite that, in order to sort of, let that plant grow, I had to sow a seed that was sort of me in some way,
Hmm.
shape, or form. There is also, like I said, just the idea that I'm tackling a theme that I think is incredibly personal. Several themes, identity, memory, reconciling those things with loss. Um, so I'm sowing some pretty personal experiences in there, deep
Hmm.
within the fiction that sort of inspires some of the broader strokes. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately, and I've said this before in a couple other interviews, it's creating art is therapeutic and cathartic in a way because you're trying to express something that you haven't quite been able to say out loud sometimes, and you're able to
Hmm.
work through it sort of with a little bit of a step removed between you and it. So this story has helped me sort of understand myself as a person a little bit more, understand who I am. Like at the end of the day, the protagonist's main challenge is trying to find himself in the face of a world who is aggressively trying to tell him who to be and how to be it. And I think that particularly in this internet age where you have, um, you know, all of these things trying to command your sense of self, and it's always been like that. But I
Hmm.
think it's just important to find who you are and what is most authentic to you, and how
Hmm.
ultimately you can contribute to the world, right? Whether it's something small, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
just being kind to somebody at a bar in a moment of need, and sometimes you don't know when that's going to happen. Sometimes you won't know at all, but or it's doing something major like volunteering, at your local fire department, or telling a story that matters to somebody, or in your case, you're sharing yourself and your interests in comics with somebody, and that might help somebody feel a little bit less lonely day to day. I just think that at the end of the day, the story is finding that part about yourself that is true and authentic, and also is how you can contribute to the world, in a way that is specifically yours.
And where can we find you in the social media platform? Where can we find your work and more projects?
Sure, yeah. So I have a link tree that you can also find pretty much in any one of my social media tags, like in the bios. But you can find me
Hmm.
on Facebook and on Instagram at Pocket Watch Press, which is the name of my independent publishing company. You
Nice.
can find me on Twitter. If you type in Pocket Watch Press, it will populate, but the actual tag is P Watch Press 2020, I think, or maybe just P Watch Press. I think it's just P Watch Press.
Hmm.
And yeah, we're currently running a campaign on Kickstarter. It's yeah, on the screen and for any of you audio viewers, it's kickstarter.com/projects/the Helix/area 51, the Helix Project 5. And despite it being the fifth issue in the series, there are ways for you to add on all of the prior issues. However, I will say that this seems like it will be the last campaign to get the first prints of issue one. We do have a
Hmm.
new edition, which I've tried to sort of beef up and make worth your while with a brand new cover. It's also embossed. It's also got an incredible
Ooh.
introduction from DG Chichester and the pull quote from David Pepos. And then in the back, We added a couple extra pages, so 2 of which are featured cover gallery with the original 2 covers, and then the last 2 pages are perfect for somebody who's sort of a craft nut or somebody interested in making comics, because it presents the raw inks to that cover with all of the original coloring and lighting notes. And then there's a director's commentary page from me with one of the pages in the issue represented, part of my original script, and just sort of a discussion about how we worked from the ground being the script to up to the finished page. So it's got a lot of really, I think, useful and interesting material out there for somebody who is just interested in the craft of comics.
Yes, definitely, guys. Please check it out. Area 51, the Helix Project. It is for number 5, but you can get number 1 to 4 as well. So please do yourself a favor and check it out. The art is amazing. The lettering is outstanding. The writing is fantastic. Definitely worth checking out. Trevor, I got to admit, it's been an absolute honor having you today. Thank you for taking the time in your busy schedule to reach out to me and being able to be on the show. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, man. Listen, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to talk about these things that have been floating in my head, and I appreciate your kindness and your accommodation of my constant babbling, because that's just what I do. I've learned that it is difficult to shut off. So, thank you so much for having me and being such a gracious host.
Thank you so much. And please check out Comic Crusaders. Also, click like and subscribe to get more from our content. And until then, thank you, Trevor, and I'll see you all next time.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this Comic Crusaders production. For real-time news on all things pop culture, please feel free to follow us on social media. For articles, original content, merchandise, and more, please go to www.comiccrusaders.com. Also follow along with all of the websites in the Comic Crusaders family. As always, if you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the Comic Crusaders YouTube channel.